Today in this lecture, we would be looking at the new and unique process of the Human Rights Council called the Universal Periodic Review. The Universal Periodic Review is a new and unique process of the United Nations Human Rights Council. Through this process, the overall human rights situation of each of the 193 member states of the United Nations is reviewed by the rest of the member states. In other words, UPR is a peer review process in which the state under review can showcase its own achievements in human rights, and all the other member states can question, commend, or recommend measures to improve human rights situation. The primary objective of the process is to improve the human rights situation on the ground. The members can either accept or reject the recommendations made by other member states. It is a continuous and cyclic process. The first cycle began in 2008 and it's over, and the second cycle has begun in 2012. The UPR process. The UPR examination takes place during a 3.5-hour review conducted by the UPR Working Group, which is open to any member states in the form of an interactive dialogue. The working group is composed of all the UN member states and chaired by the President of the Human Rights Council. Other relevant stakeholders such as NGOs, national institutions, and the UN agencies can attend the working group, but they cannot take the floor. The state under review is given 70 minutes to present its report, answer questions made by other states, and present its concluding remarks. 140 minutes are allocated to the states participating in the review to ask questions, make comments, and recommendations to the state under review. They can also transmit written questions to the state under review 10 working days before its UPR. The result of each review is reflected in an outcome report listing the recommendations the state under review will have to implement before the next review. The working group session takes place in Palais des Nations in Geneva 3 times a year, that is January, February, May, June, and October, November. Each session is dedicated to 14 states each. In 1 year, a total of 42 states are reviewed. In the first cycle, it took 4.5 years to review all the 192 countries. The UPR is a full cycle process comprising of 3 key stages. 1, the review of the human rights situation of the state under review. 2, the implementation between these 2 reviews, which is a gap of 4.5 years, where the recommendation, the voluntary pledges made are supposed to be implemented. 3rd is reporting at the next review on the implementation of those recommendations and pledges and on the human rights situation in the country since the previous review. The review. The legal basis of the UPR review is to assess to what extent the state respects their human rights obligation contained in various UN documents. 1, the Charter of the United Nations. 2, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 3, the human rights treaties ratified by the state concerned. And 4th, the voluntary pledge and commitments made by the state, including those undertaken when presenting the candidature for the state to the Human Rights Council. 5th is the applicable international humanitarian law. The 3 main documents that are used for each review is usually available at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights website 6 weeks before the start of the UPR working group. The 3 documents are as follows. 1, the National Report, which is a 20-page report prepared by the states concerned on the human rights situation in the country. 2 is the compilation of 10 pages prepared by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, contained in informations from treaty bodies, special procedures, UN agencies such as UNDP, UNISCHAP, etc. And the third document is a summary of 10-page prepared by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, containing information about civil society as well as the national human rights institutions. The actual review starts with the presentation of the state under review on its national report and of its responses to the advanced questions. The advanced questions are the questions submitted by the state in writing 10 days before the review. Following this presentation, an interactive dialogue takes place during which the state takes the floor and asks questions and make comments on the human rights situation in that particular country. During this interactive dialogue, the state under review takes the floor regularly to answer those questions and comments and on those recommendations. At the end, the state under review presents its concluding remarks. The list of speakers. Every state willing to speak on a specific review is able to do so. The 140 minutes at hand for the reviewing state are divided by the number of states interested in taking the floor. The list of the speakers of all the 14 reviews of a given working group session is open the week before the beginning of the session, and the states have 4 days to register. Then its list is arranged in English alphabetical order, and a letter is drawn by lot by the President of the Human Rights Council to decide where the list will begin. The states are able to swap places on the list. Those wishing to withdraw from the list have to inform the Secretariat at least 30 minutes before the beginning of the review to allow the letter to recalculate the speaking time provided to each delegation. Troika is another interesting feature of the Universal Periodic Review. A Troika consists of 3 countries' delegation assisting the review. The Troika members are selected by drawing lots among the members of the Human Rights Council and from different regional groups. They can be delegate members or experts nominated by the selected states. Each state under review has a different Troika. The state under review can request that one of the 3 members to be from the same regional group and or one of the Troikas. One of the Troika members be substituted, although on one occasion only. Finally, a Troika member may ask to be excluded from participation in a specific review. The Troika receives the written questions and or issues raised by the states and relay the same to the state under review. The Troika prepares the report of the working group, which contains a full account of the proceedings with the involvement of the state under review and with the assistance of the Secretariat. Finally, one of the Troika members is in charge of introducing the report before its adoption by the working group. The report contains the summary of the interactive dialogue, the responses by the state under review to the questions and recommendations, and the full list of recommendations made by the states. The report is adopted first time during the working group session a few days after the review. The adoption lasts for 30 minutes and is mainly procedural. Once the report has been adopted during the working group session, it is then adopted by consensus a few months later in the plenary session of the United Nations Human Rights Council. 1 hour of the plenary is allocated to the adoption, divided as such: 20 minutes for the state under review to reply to the questions and issues that were not sufficiently addressed during the review and response to the recommendation that was raised by the states during the interactive dialogue. 2 is 20 minutes for the states to take the floor and express their opinion on the outcome of the review. And the last 20 minutes is dedicated to the civil society and NGOs and national human rights institutions to make general comments. Recommendations. Recommendations are suggestions made to the state under review to improve the human rights situation in the country. They can be of different natures and issue and are the key element of the review. During the first UPR cycle, a total of 21,000 recommendations were made to the 192 states. The state under review has the possibility to accept or not accept the recommendation. Its response to its recommendation must be clearly explained in writing in a specific document called addendum. This addendum should be submitted to the Human Rights Council in advance of the adoption of the report at the Human Rights Council session. Selection of state under review. During the selection phase of the first UPR cycle, states were split per regional groups. Subsequently, the lists of each group was organized so that the state selected first were those whose terms of membership in the Human Rights Council were ending in the first. Second, those terms of membership were ending subsequently. And the third, those who volunteered for the UPR. Then the list of the countries are reorganized in alphabetical order, starting with the country drawn by lot by the President. The period between the two reviews. The period between the two reviews is called the follow-up. It is the moment during which the state under review implements the recommendations they receive. The follow-up is the most critical and important phase of the whole UPR process, as it is the one leading to the concrete realization of the UPR goals, which is to improve the human rights situation on the ground. The success of this phase will also determine the efficiency and credibility of this mechanism and demonstrates states' engagement with the promotion and strengthening of human rights. NGOs' role in UPR. The Universal Periodic Review is basically a state-driven exercise. However, despite the limited role during the interactive dialogue per se, the non-governmental organizations have many opportunities to take part and influence the UPR process. Before the UPR review, in order to write a national report to be submitted to the Human Rights Council, the state under review is encouraged to hold a broad consultation process at the national level with all the relevant stakeholders. This consultation should take place at least a year before the review in different cities and regions of the country and include a broad range of civil society organizations such as national institutions, NGOs, human rights defenders, local associations, grassroots organizations, trade union, indigenous peoples if they exist, etc. NGOs can seize this opportunity to run a national campaign to promote the UPR and bring to the attention of the general public and the media. Any civil society actors, national institution, NGO, human rights defenders, local association, grassroots organization, trade union and indigenous people can submit information to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights directly as well. An individual submission by an NGO is limited to 2,815 words, excluding, of course, the footnotes and annexures. A joint submission submitted by a coalition of NGOs, 2 or more, can reach up to 5,630 words. NGOs can lobby states in order to bring to their attention specific issues and to obtain that such issues be addressed during the interactive dialogue in the form of questions or recommendations. Those issues can also be raised through advanced questions. To facilitate NGOs lobbying, UPR Info, an NGO, also organize pre-sessions in Geneva between NGOs and states 2 months before the review. UPR Info organizes a 1-hour meeting on the state under review and give the floor to national and international NGOs and brief permanent missions about the human rights situation in the country. During the review, NGOs has the possibility to hold side events during the session of the working group. Its review is webcasted, which means filmed by the UN and accessible live and archived in the UN websites. NGOs can organize screening of these reviews and invite civil society, the media, parliamentarians, the opposition, the UN agencies, etc. Right after the review, NGOs can hold press conferences and issue press statements to share their assessment of the review. Between the review and the report's adoption at the Human Rights Council, NGOs can lobby the state under review in the capital to accept as many recommendations as possible. They can also ensure that the government submits to the Human Rights Council an addendum containing clear and detailed response to its recommendations received. During the adoption of the report of the working group at the UN Human Rights Council plenary session, 20 minutes are allocated for NGOs to make statements. In total, 10 NGOs are given 2 minutes each. The 10 slots, which will be allocated on a first-come, first-served basis, NGOs also have the possibility to deliver their statements by video instead of traveling to Geneva. NGOs can also submit written statements under any item, including the 6th one, which is on the UPR. Between the two reviews, the states have to implement the recommendations they have accepted and the voluntary pledges that they have taken. At the next UPR, they will be reviewed on the implementation of those recommendations and pledges and on the human rights situation in the country since the previous review. NGOs have a great role to play between the two reviews. They can make recommendations and pledges public, monitor their implementations, engage in dialogue with the state reviewed to participate in their implementation, report to the Human Rights Council on the progress by making statements. Conclusion. As Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, stated, UPR has great potential to promote and protect human rights in the darkest corner of the world. It is true that UPR is opening a whole new possibilities in the UN human rights process. We are living in a very interesting time as the process itself is taking shape and adapting to the needs and demands of the human rights challenges on the ground, as well as the intricacies of the UN human rights system. Even though it is the state-centered process, civil society has a great role to play, as any human rights mechanism will be grossly inadequate without the participation of the civil society. The role of the civil society in monitoring the actual implementation of the recommendations on the ground can hardly be overstated. Civil society should ensure that what the governments promise in the United Nations should be translated into action, and human beings under them actually enjoy their basic and fundamental human rights.